Okay, you are welcome, students, to HIS 411, Defense and Strategy, the 20th and 21st century. This is going to be the last class for the first semester, 2025 to 2026. We are going to be looking at the topic, the causes of war. Now, like I said before you left school for your vacation, this topic is going to cover most of what you did in 300 level when you were looking at war and diplomacy. It's going to enable you put into practice some of the knowledge that you got, studying war and diplomacy in Europe, and also revolution and nationalism in Europe. It helps you put them in perspective, because the wars that have been fought throughout the world, not just in Europe and West Africa, Middle East, Americas, and Southeast Asia, all of these wars have certain things that are in common. They have things in common. That's the causative factors to these conflicts. In fact, all conflicts all over the world have similar causative factors that can be analyzed, and understood in very, very simple formats. And in historical studies, strategic studies, we usually use levels of analysis in trying to understand the causative factors of war. Because if you attempt to look at unique or distinctive causes of each conflict, they are very vast. They are plenty. They are very complex in every way possible. However, when you categorize them into levels of analysis, it now becomes easier, to understand them and to be able to engage with them. And my expectation, especially during the exam, is for you to be able to analyze a couple of conflicts. Most of the conflicts that we dealt with in HIS 314, war and diplomacy in Europe, also revolution, nationalism. And you can also pick up on some of the conflicts you did, you studied in HIS 313, the Middle East, and also conflicts in West Africa. You also did war and diplomacy in West Africa. So you can pick on some of these conflicts and use them as analytical tools, to prefer very good workable examples to enable you discuss and analyze some of the levels of analysis that we'll be discussing. So essentially, there are three levels of analysis, three groupings, analytical groupings for understanding how conflicts emerge and how they originate. Instead of looking at the distinctive causes of each of these conflicts, we try to put them under umbrella groups that help us, better understand them. And these levels of analysis constitute the first one, which is state level of analysis. And then you have individual level of analysis, which is the second one. Then you have the third, which is the systemic level of analysis. So what essentially is a state level of analysis? At the state level of analysis, the belief in international relations is that the international environment is essentially chaotic. And this state level of analysis is usually anchored by the theory of realism, that because of the chaotic nature of the international environment, given that there's no overriding superior controlling authority that can impress its will on every single state, that environment, every state is now burdened, to obtain power in order to sustain itself. So essentially, the state level of analysis is ruled by the theory of realism, that every state, its actions at the international scene is guided, propelled by the need to obtain power for the sake of its national security, for the sake of maintaining its sovereignty. So, as a consequence of this, every state pursues power not just for the sake of power itself, but as a means to an end. And as a consequence of this, several conflicts can spark up from this pursuit of power. Because the pursuit of power is a means to an end, it can bring states to clash, either over resources, most of the times over resources, or over sovereignty or some other issues in the international environment. And this position, this level of analysis easily can be relatable to a vast number of conflicts that we come across all over the world. When you look at many of the conflicts that emerge, you are able to observe the interest of state becoming dominant in the causative or the trigger factors that eventually lead to the conflicts. Let's look at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which is unfolding right before our eyes. You can very well see that the state level of analysis seems to be a dominant frame that we can use to analyze that particular conflict, in the sense that both states have intrinsic interest, not just in territory, but also in several other issues that are opposing to each other and have clashed. And as a consequence of that, the conflict emerged. Russia, the Russian Federation, of course, had always impressed on NATO not to expand eastward. And the fact that the government of Ukraine had applied for and intended to join NATO at this point in time had pushed the Russian Federation to the wall entirely, because looking far back to when this debate over the expansion of NATO has started, there had been consistent break in the agreements that the West and the East had entered into concerning the expansion of the Soviet Union, the expansion of NATO. Now we're looking at all the way back to the Cold War, and also the post-Cold War era. Now, during the Cold War, of course, NATO had expanded, and in the post-Cold War era, the basic agreement was to maintain the boundaries of NATO so that the Russian Federation would not feel intimidated or pressured into any form of action. But basically, the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its allies ignored all of this. So when we look at it, the long and short is the fact that the state infrastructure was very critical in leading to this conflict. Now, if you examine several other conflicts, all over the world, like I encouraged you to do, picking conflicts from, Middle East, from Africa, from Southeast Asia, and all over the place, you can be able to look at each of these conflicts in the light of this particular analytical tool, this level of analysis, the fact that the interest of state is often at the root of conflicts that emerge, because the state is actually pushing for maybe dominance, or for resources, or for maintenance of sovereignty, or for balance of power, or any of these other factors that eventually clash with the interests of other states, consequently resulting into war, conflict. So that level of analysis is very, very clear. Now, when you move to the next level of analysis, which is the individual level of analysis, this is a little bit more complicated or more convoluted, because the individual level of analysis is trying to establish that the causal roots of conflicts go beyond the state, essentially, and they are rooted in the individuals that run the state. Or let's be more specific, the heads of states, so to speak, that the root causes of conflicts are rooted, they are embedded inside of these personalities. And to a very large extent, we can find examples that validate this level of analysis throughout history. Now, the question, like I said in the last lecture we had at SIP building, is the fact that when you begin to analyze levels of analysis, questions that I'm going to bring up in your exam with reference to levels of analysis, I will not be expecting you to give me answers that are sacrosanct, but rather arguments, because your exam questions with reference to this will be prodding you to bring forth arguments in support of a particular level of analysis that you prefer or you perceive is the most dominant when it comes to causative factors of conflict. So, with reference to individual level of analysis, for instance, now, the people who believe that individual level of analysis is dominant or is most dominant as a causative factor to conflict believe that the individuals are the ones that hold the keys to whether a conflict emerges or not. Now, granted that we have already examined the role that the state plays, the intellectuals who hold on to the individual level of analysis as a key factor maintain that the state apparatus itself is run by individuals. So, for the state apparatus to be able to gravitate towards conflict, the individual concept, becomes critical in guiding a state in that particular direction. And this is very, very important in the sense that when you look at some of the major conflicts that have emerged over time, most of the times we use European conflicts as examples because they are well documented and they are very easily engaged with. We find that the individual level of analysis, as a construct for explaining the outbreak of conflict is usually very, very strong. Let's take Hitler, for instance. In our study in HIS 314, when we looked, deeper into the Second World War, you discover that Hitler played a critical role in pushing Germany into war. His personality, the cult personality of a megalomaniac, somebody who believed so strongly in the advancement of the German Aryan race to the detriment of every other race in the world. He seems to have held certain beliefs that would obviously, under most circumstances, lead to conflict when you look at that from the individual level. When you also study his book Mein Kampf, you discover that this was somebody that some historians, of course, believe that he was disturbed. But looking at Mein Kampf and the ideological positions that he put forward, it is obvious that he was at every point in time planning to and had every intention of engaging with conflict with other European nations. So there wasn't any possibility that the Allied powers would have one way or the other deterred him because of his own personal ambition and desire to engage in conflict. So the individual level of analysis looks at the individual leader of the state as one of the critical factors that enables a war to emerge. Now, in looking at the individual, this level of analysis breaks down subcategories. We have the psychological category, then you also have the anthropological, category. Then finally, you have the sociological category. That is, all of these categories coexist within or under the auspices of the individual level. So first, let us look at the psychological category, as the case may be. Now, this is a category that was championed, by Sigmund Freud, who believed that human beings have an innate streak of aggression, and that aggression is actually a natural capacity that enables them to survive. So that means the propensity of human beings to use brute force, to obtain what will protect them or to maintain something that will help them survive within an environment, he perceives this as a necessary instrument for the survival of human beings, and as such, it seemed to be ingrained in the psyche of human beings to fight, to make war. So, psychologically, that's what Sigmund Freud believes, that human beings are endowed with. That is, they are psychologically endowed with that capacity to make war. Now, the next subgroup, which is biological, anthropological in nature, essentially believes that human beings are naturally, that means their genetic makeup is naturally encoded with the capacity to make war. So this is championed by people like Konrad Lorenz, modern social biologists, and also people like Edward Wilson, who believe that it is in our DNA, human DNA, to fight, to make war, to be violent. So the primordial nature of Homo sapiens is such that he cannot but contend with other people and be propelled towards violent actions in order to protect his interests, protect his family, get more uh, land resources, so on and so forth. Now, apart from this, we also have the anthropological subsection of the individual level of analysis that believe that war is learned. It's an acquired behavior. This group is led by people like Margaret Mead, who believes that some groups like the Eskimos, who don't even have the word for war in their language, naturally are not disposed towards conflict. Now this is a very strong point. The fact that the pygmies in Central Africa also don't have war as a word within their linguistic framework goes to show that these are words, expressions, and terminologies that they don't use. So if they don't use it, then that means they don't fight. Throughout their evolution, there is no construct, for explaining war, and engaging in war. Now, this is a very strong argument. This is a very, very strong argument that one way or the other, impacts, creates a stronger position for the individual level of analysis when you are looking at the causative factors of war. However, it is also important for us to begin to balance this with the third level of analysis, which is the systemic level of analysis. And to a very large extent, when you look at the systemic level of analysis, it kind of creates one form of balance. And what essentially does the systemic level of analysis hold? It believes that conflict, war, that is, of course, at the state level, we're not looking at conflict among individuals in this case now, in this regard, the war is a function of the system, that the prevailing system at a point in time can either present itself as a conducive environment for war to emerge, or as an environment that discourages the emergence of war. And when you study the international system over time, we should be able, or we have been able, to observe at sundry times, at different instances, in which the system, the prevailing system at an instance was such that it encouraged, it made the outbreak of war inevitable. Let's take, for instance, the First World War. I know many people very easily point to the assassination of Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary, as being a trigger to the outbreak of the First World War. But if we pull back and look at the international system that was at play at that point in time, the international system, of course, which was balance of power, and the fact that the power that was balanced at that point in time was balanced on a bifocal group or collection of alliances that had invariably become armed camps. So the Europe was essentially divided into two armed camps. You've seen these, alliance systems, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente on the other side, as platforms for competition, military competition. So essentially, historians, when you pull back, historians are able to say that the assassination of Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand would not necessarily have, resulted into conflict. It wouldn't have been a spark into conflict if the system itself had not presented the opportunity by creating the tension that was so palpable that some called Europe, a keg of gunpowder, as at that time. So the position of the argument from the systemic level of analysis is very, very strong. Very, very strong. So if you look at, or if you use the systemic level of analysis, that frame of analysis, if you use it in all the conflicts that you may want to examine, you can see certain levels of truth, in the system level of analysis argument that the environment is critical to the outbreak of war. The system, the political system, the international system, the social system is usually very critical in either encouraging, a drag, an advance towards conflict, towards war, or in preserving, the world from war. Now, another example that is very instructive is that of the Cold War. This may sound a little bit far-fetched, but when you look at the build-up of arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States of America and her allies, it is clear that the system that was in place at that time, even though two armed camps had already emerged in the East and the West, in the capitalist and the communist armed camps, the fact that that particular system had created nuclear deterrence, it was very, very obvious that the two nations, or the two camps, so to speak, could not regress into war. Why? Because the system had created mutual assured destruction, had created mutual assured destruction, such that any attempt to go to war would have essentially resulted into the annihilation of all the belligerents, so to speak. So the system, though it was tense, it created a lot of tension internationally, and it was very fearsome. It inadvertently created for itself a form of deterrence for both parties, the United States and the Soviet Union, to consider conflict at all. That's the reason why during this period we see that there were a lot of proxy conflict rather than a head-on, frontal conflict between the Soviet Union and the America and her allies. So there are certain factors within a system that can be able to deter conflict. So the systemic level of analysis is very critical when you're analyzing conflicts. And in your exams, I'll be expecting the questions that will come up in the exams are not hard and fast questions in which you are either telling me the correct answer or the wrong answer. No. What I'll be expecting is an analysis. The questions that will be coming up with reference to this topic will be requiring an analysis, requiring an argument that we use the various levels of analysis in order to arrive at the strong points of the arguments that you will be presenting during the exam. So it's appreciate you for taking time to be on this class. I expect you to listen and watch the class video over and over again and prepare for your exams next year. I wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance. God bless you.